In September of 476 AD, a Roman emperor was removed from his throne. No great battle preceded it, no catastrophic siege, no final heroic stand. A Germanic chieftain named Odoacer simply walked into the palace, handed the emperor a letter of resignation, and sent him into retirement on a pension. And with that, 12 centuries of Roman civilization ended. But here's the question historians have been fighting about for 250 years. Was that even the real fall? Because the story you were taught in school, the one about barbarians at the gates, a weakened army, and a corrupt empire collapsing under its own weight, that story is only half true. And the half they left out is far more interesting. To understand how Rome fell, you first need to understand what Rome actually was, because most people have no idea of the scale. At its height under Emperor Trajan in 117 AD, the Roman Empire stretched from the deserts of North Africa to the highlands of Scotland, from the Atlantic coast of Portugal to the banks of the Euphrates River in modern Iraq. It governed an estimated 70 million people, roughly 1/4 of the entire human population of Earth at the time. It built 80,000 kilometers of roads so precisely engineered that some are still visible today. It constructed aqueducts that carried fresh water across mountain ranges. It ran a legal system so sophisticated that its principles still form the foundation of law in dozens of modern countries. Rome was not just an empire, it was the operating system of the ancient Western world. So when it fell, and it did fall, something fundamental broke in human civilization. The population of the city of Rome itself collapsed from over 1 million people to fewer than 20,000 within 2 centuries. Literacy rates plummeted, long-distance trade nearly ceased, the roads crumbled, the aqueducts ran dry. Historians would later call what followed the Dark Ages. But what actually caused the collapse of something so powerful, so deeply embedded in the world? The textbook answer is deceptively simple and dangerously incomplete. The version most of us learned goes roughly like this. Rome grew too large to defend. Barbarian tribes, the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Huns, pressed in from all sides. The military became overstretched. The emperors grew corrupt and incompetent. Christianity weakened Roman civic discipline, and eventually the whole structure simply collapsed inward. There is truth in this. Rome's military did change dramatically in its final century. Unable to recruit enough soldiers from Roman citizens, emperors began hiring Germanic mercenaries in growing numbers, until the ranks of the legions were filled with soldiers who had no particular loyalty to Rome itself. Roman officials made the situation worse through catastrophic mismanagement, forcing desperate Gothic refugees to trade their own children into slavery in exchange for food. In brutalizing the Goths, Rome manufactured a dangerous enemy inside its own borders. When the oppression became unbearable, the Goths rose up and routed a Roman army at the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, killing the Eastern Emperor Valens in the process. That was a turning point. But it was not the cause. One historian, Alexander Demant, spent years cataloguing every theory ever proposed for Rome's collapse. His final list contained 210 separate factors. 210. That number alone should tell you something. When 210 different explanations exist for a single event, the real answer is almost certainly that all of them contributed. That Rome didn't fall from one wound. It bled from hundreds simultaneously. So let's talk about the ones the textbooks skipped. Long before the first barbarian breached the Roman frontier, something invisible was already dismantling the empire from within. Plague. At its peak, the Antonine Plague which struck between 165 and 180 Chu AD, was killing an estimated 2,000 people per day in Rome alone. 2,000 people, every single day. It tore through the Roman legions at the exact moment Rome needed them most. It killed 2 emperors. It depopulated entire provinces. And it was only the beginning. A second devastating epidemic followed, the Cyprian Plague, which ravaged the empire between 249 and 269 AD. Historian Paulus Orosius described the aftermath in stark terms. Country houses, fields and towns were left without inhabitants. Nothing remained but ruins and forests. Think about what that means for an empire that ran on manpower. Soldiers to defend the borders, farmers to feed the cities, tax collectors to fund the military. When the people disappear, everything else follows. Modern historians now point to an additional factor that amplified all of this: climate change. There had been a Roman climate optimum, warm, stable, productive weather across the Mediterranean, from around 200 BC to 150 AD. Then the climate shifted, harvests became unreliable, food security weakened, and after 450 AD, a late antique Little Ice Age made conditions dramatically worse, directly contributing to the cascade of factors that brought Rome down. A weakened climate, mass death from plague, a military running out of loyal soldiers, and Rome still had not faced its most dangerous enemy. Here is the part of Rome's fall that rarely makes it into the classroom: the economy. At its height, Rome operated with relatively low taxes, free trade, and private property protections. It had mass production of consumer goods and something resembling a stock market. It was the economic center of the ancient world. Then the crises began to stack: plagues, wars, political instability, and the emperors responded the way desperate governments often do. They debased the currency. Roman silver coins, the denarius, were gradually hollowed out. In the time of Emperor Augustus, a denarius was nearly pure silver. 2 centuries later, it contained just 5% silver, the Roman equivalent of printing money. The inflation that followed was devastating. In 301 AD, Emperor Diocletian attempted to fix the problem with his Edict of Maximum Prices, a comprehensive system of wage and price controls enforced by the penalty of death. The result was catastrophic. Merchants stopped bringing goods to market rather than sell at a loss. The dearth worsened. People starved. Eventually, the law collapsed under the weight of its own failure. An empire that couldn't feed its people, pay its soldiers, or maintain its infrastructure was an empire on borrowed time. The barbarians didn't conquer a strong Rome. They walked into the ruins of one that had already collapsed from the inside. Now, here is where it gets genuinely complicated, because many historians today argue that the fall of Rome in 476 AD, the date in every textbook, is actually a myth. What most people forget is that Constantine had split the empire into 2 halves in 330 AD. When the Western Empire fell in 476, the eastern half, centered on Constantinople, didn't fall at all. It kept going for another 1,000 years. The Byzantine Empire, as we now call it, survived until 1453 AD, nearly a millennium after Rome's supposed collapse. It maintained Roman law, Roman administration, Roman culture, Greek and Roman identity fused into something that outlasted everything the Western Empire built. Some modern historians don't use the word fall at all. They prefer transformation, arguing that Roman culture and political identity continued and evolved rather than simply ending. The period is now often called late antiquity rather than the Dark Ages, emphasizing continuity over collapse. So perhaps the real lesson of Rome's end is not about weakness. It's about what survives when empires transform. The roads crumbled, the legions dissolved, the city of Rome emptied. But Roman law still governs your country. Roman architecture still shapes your cities. The language of Rome, Latin, still lives in every word ending in tien, al, ent, that you use today. Rome didn't just fall, it became everything that came after it. Historian Glenn Bowersock once wrote that since the 18th century we have been obsessed with Rome's fall, valued as an archetype for every perceived decline, and as a symbol for our own fears. And that obsession exists for a reason, because every great civilization that came after Rome has looked at its collapse and asked the same quiet, uncomfortable question: could it happen to us? The answer Rome gives back is neither comforting nor despairing. It says, civilizations don't fall from a single blow. They are worn down by compounding crises: climate, disease, economic mismanagement, political failure, loss of shared identity. Until one day, the structure that held everything together simply isn't strong enough to hold any longer. As one historian put it, Rome fell because it ceased to be Roman in spirit long before the last emperor was deposed. Not the barbarians at the gates, the erosion within. That is the lesson Rome left buried in its ruins. And it is one that no textbook has ever quite managed to teach. If the story of Rome's collapse moved something in you, that feeling that great things can end, and that their ending tells us something about ourselves, then you are exactly who this channel was built for. Collapsed worlds exist to tell the stories of the empires, civilizations, and moments that shaped history, and what their endings left behind. Subscribe. Because next, we go to the Bronze Age, the civilization that was 3,000 years in the making and collapsed in less than 50. That story makes Rome look simple,